G7 is the summit meeting of the heads of state and government. This year, G7 presidency is considered to be the highlight. Once upon a time, it was the group of 8, G8, from 1997 until 2014, when Russia suspended indefinitely following the annexation of Crimea. Whereupon the political forum name reverted back to G7. Good afternoon, this is Henry Keane and a daily wrap-up show on Freedom TV channel. Under the German presidency in 2022, ministers of the G7 states responsible for foreign affairs, labour, health, environment, digital matters and other specialist areas will again meet to discuss their issues. And for the first time ever, the G7 justice ministers meet together. They want to coordinate better in the investigation of Russian crime in Ukraine. The judicial authorities of the 7 most important Western economic powers, G7, want to work more closely together in order to solve Russian war crimes in Ukraine. For German law enforcement agencies, it is possible to help investigate Russian war crimes in Ukraine through witness interviews with Ukrainian refugees in Germany. Federal Minister of Justice Bushman said 1 million Ukrainians who have found refuge in Germany are called upon to report such crimes as victims or witnesses.
The Minister of Justice of Germany answers in a very practical tone to the question, how will these main war criminals be brought to the dock? He said either the defendants will be on the territory of the countries if they will be outside of Russia, or after the defeat of Russia, there is a certain condition that they be sent to an international tribunal by military troops or authorities.
Ukrainian Justice Minister Denis Maluska informed his colleagues that almost 50,000 suspected cases of war crimes had been recorded since the start of the Russian invasion last February and that around 600 suspects and accused were being investigated. And, most unfortunately, there is going to be more. As rightly put by Timothy Snyder, actually there is too much evidence.
The problem is not the lack of genocide evidence, but on contrary, there are way too much of it. We are overwhelmed with evidence of both committing and intent to commit genocide, and this overload leads us to a vicious circle in which the standard of genocide recognition are raised with each case. Because what is being done becomes more habitual, and with it seems that it does not reach the level where genocide can be recognized. Timothy Snyder, American Christian writer and professor at Yale University at the conference International Law Against Genocide.
But it could only seem so to those whose family member was not found in a mass grave, whose daughters were not raped, sons murdered, and houses ruined, to anyone but Ukrainians. We in Ukraine know what it is, and we know how it is called. And not only is it the victory that we seek for.
We need more than victory. We strive for justice for our people against whom Russian missile raids are targeted. Today, I'm asking you to become a world leader of justice for Ukraine, but also for the world. Justice is needed for the whole world to survive. Olena Zelenska, First Lady of Ukraine, in an address to the British Parliament.
The First Lady also called on the British Parliament and the government to lead a global effort to establish a special tribunal for the crime of Russian aggression against Ukraine. In particular, to promote the adoption of the resolution of the UN General Assembly prepared by Ukraine on the creation of special tribunal for the crime of aggression of the Russian Federation against our country, by analogy with the declaration of St. James Palace of the Second World War, when a document was signed on January 13, 1942, which recorded the will to prosecute all those guilty of war crimes, crimes against humanity and crimes against peace. Just like the Nuremberg trials, the post-war reconstruction of Ukraine is also a topic at the top of the list. The topic was previously discussed at an international expert conference on the recovery, reconstruction and modernization of Ukraine in Berlin, 25th of October. Alexei Chernyshov, ex-Minister for Communities and Territories Development of Ukraine, used to take part in the said discussion. Hosted by the German G7 presidency and the EU Commission, the meeting resulted in quite obvious resumption made by German Federal Chancellor Scholz, who stressed, Ukraine cannot manage it alone. The European Union cannot manage it alone either. It can only be achieved by the entire global community, which is now lending its support to Ukraine. So the entire world is already thinking about how to help us to recover, reconstruct, and modernize in the future. Assuming, of course, we survive that long to cherish the moment, but that is the topic to avoid discussing, not on only big conferences like G7, in general. Why make faces frown, right? But we will not only survive, I assure you, we'll thrive. Because while Russia is doing its worst to extinct for the sake of its past, Ukraine is doing its best to survive for the sake of its future. So thank you very much, G7. Meet you there. Russia's search abroad for resources to continue its aggression against Ukraine. The reviewers record active transportation from China to Russia by AN-124 aircraft. Well, the war is a costly venture. This invasive, unjust, and criminal warfare has already cost Russia, I stress out Russia, not Putin, since it is Russian nation who is and will be paying for Putin's suicidal tendencies implementation. I don't think there is a proper figure to name. Just say any and multiply by any, and with a great deal of probability, it's still going to be more. In an unprovoked attempt to invalidate the very existence of Ukraine as a state, Russia is cancelling its own future. But who's to revolt? While the nation is fleeing demobilization, Moscow is searching for resources to continue its aggression against Ukraine. Abroad, as usual.
Russia will emerge from this war weaker than it went in. They have suffered tens of thousands of casualties, orders of magnitude more than the Soviet Union experienced in Afghanistan in 10 years. Russian forces have probably lost half of their main battle tanks in the entire Russian military, and they've dodged down more than 80% of their land force in Ukraine. Defense Undersecretary Colin Kahl on National Defense Strategy.
So Russia is continuing its exhausting war. Why? We leave that question to psychiatrists and sociologists that yet to find a term for defining the whole nation going delusional. What's the reason? Because what does an average Russian see looking around in his household that is actually made in Russia? Korean washing machine, American computer and smartphone, and a Facebook? They must go out in Italian clothes and to drink French wine and discuss haute couture and Hollywood movies. While the Russian military-industrial complex, MIC, has clearly shown its inability to service Putin's regime's prolonged, full-scale war, and Kremlin desperately searching for and collecting the means to continue the war abroad, Putin searches in Belarus, Iran, possibly also in China and North Korea. Apparently not in vain, Russian Defense Minister Shoigu said today that Russia is testing new ways of combat, use of missile and artillery.
A significant role is assigned to rocket troops and artillery. During the special operation, new methods of their combat use are being tested. First of all, this concerns the use of reconnaissance and strike fire system, including unmanned aerial vehicles, as well as modern and advanced weapons. Russian Minister of Defense Sergei Shoigu admitted on the board of the military department.
Also, all Belarusian arsenals and capacities of the MIC are under actual Russian control, as well as parts of the personnel of the armed forces of Belarus, included the joint group, and AN-124 aircraft from China delivers A-200 and A-300 missiles for Belarusian MLRS complex Polonaise, which Russia plans to use for shelling Ukraine. Why so persistently? Many experts say that Russia's motives for invading Ukraine vary from security fears to revisionist historical claims that a Ukrainian national identity simply does not exist. But maybe, just maybe, it is Ukraine's extraordinary riches in energy, minerals, and agriculture that are the prize for the Kremlin? Unreachable, yet nonetheless tempting. As per Simple Logics and foreignpolicy.com resource article, Russia's announced war aim of conquering Ukraine's eastern regions and southern shores is hardly coincidental. These regions, including Ukraine's section of the Black Sea, now mainly controlled by Russia, account for about half of Ukraine's conventional oil, 72% of its natural gas, and almost its entire coal production and reserves. The bulk of Ukraine's critical minerals, especially the rare earth metals that are now in high demand, are likewise found in Donetsk and other parts of Ukraine, either occupied or threatened by Russia. A number of crucial agricultural crops feeding global markets, including wheat, corn, barley, and sunflower oil, are harvested in eastern and southeastern Ukraine. So now, losing the control over recently territories liberated by Ukrainian army and the resources those lands contain, is Russia experiencing an extreme scarcity of resources? Highly likely and very desirable that is exactly the case. An ancient oppressive, xenophobic and chauvinistic tradition that in centuries has molded into a nationwide self-praise cult, vast, remote from wealthy centers, poor, degrading and unfit for life territories, enormous inertia, political impotence and unwillingness to change has made Russia an ideal incubator for dictators. Putin just couldn't be hoping to appear and rise to the level of today's imperial inadequacy in better comfort anywhere else in the world but Russia. Today, unleashed and set on by their cornered employer, frenzied Russian TV talking heads have finally got carte blanche on literally anything and just don't have to hold back anymore.
So to directly drown such people in Tisina. Right here is where Pline Kacha. Here it is, directly drown these children, drawn in Tisina. Penalizing gays for promoting homosexuality among teenagers is not enough. They should be banned from donating blood and sperm, and their hearts, in the case of a car accident, must be buried in the ground or burned as unsuitable for the continuation of someone else's life.
Ukraine's Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba on Sunday called for global governments to ban Russia's state-controlled broadcaster RT, after a presenter suggested drowning Ukrainian children. By the way, Russia also bans Western propaganda. Kremlin prohibited sharing positive and even neutral information about lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender LGBT people and publicly displaying non-heterosexual orientations, with hefty fines for non-compliance. The ban purported to isolate children from any information on alternative sexual orientation and gender identity, including gender transition. It introduces fines up to the equivalent of $6,500 for individual and $81,000 for legal entities, such as NGOs, for disseminating such information. And all that is happening while Russia's state-led propaganda openly admits that the missile terror on Ukraine's critical infrastructure is aimed at inflicting unbearable conditions onto Ukrainians. Talking heads call for more airstrikes, which constitutes incitement of genocide. Since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, Russian propagandists have flooded the world with fake news to justify Russian aggression against Ukraine and create fake pretexts for committing crimes. Russia is actively spreading fake news and developing entire propaganda ecosystems, switching its new focus to the countries of the global south and putting enormous efforts into massive disinfo campaigns. We, in Ukraine, call on all states and international organizations to act as a united front against the spread of Russian propaganda around the world and ban all Russia's state-owned propaganda channels abroad. Because it just has nothing to do with democracy or freedom. Because Putin's regime is the embodiment of all the terrible ideals of fascism, legalized in the name of achieving its predatory goals. And we must react and react harshly. Because, to paraphrase Immanuel Kant, Putin's freedom to wave his arms ends at the tip of our nose. It was Henry Keane and the Daily Wrap-Up Show on Freedom TV channel. See you tomorrow.